Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rita Sakr. Welcome to our conversation on Gaza. This is an event I'm co-hosting with my colleague, Dr. Denis Condon, in the Department of English at Maynooth University. First, a reminder that the event will be recorded. And after the conversation, attendees from MU will become panelists and can unmute themselves to ask questions. Non-MU attendees, please send your questions in the chat function. This event will last until just before 6:30. In 2012, a report by UNRWA, the UN Works and Relief Agency for Palestine Refugees, predicted that Gaza would become unlivable by 2020. At the moment, Gaza continues to raise crucial questions regarding freedom of movement and the right to space and dignified life, particularly as we reflect on the paradox of lockdown in one of the most densely populated and besieged places on Earth, where displacement and immobility are tragically intertwined. In fact, 1 week ago, Gaza declared that its health system was collapsing amidst a catastrophic COVID-19 situation. Mentioning Gaza is often associated with imagery of bare life, food insecurity, spatial chaos and devastation, trauma and despair, in what has been called an open-air prison measuring 360 square kilometers, caught in an environmental crisis, with over half of its residents living in poverty. Today's conversation will try to move through and beyond these realities and metaphors, while revisiting UNRWA's prediction through documentary and artistic production, beginning with Andrew McConnell's photo series, Gaza Surf Club, and moving to the process of filming Gaza, the collaborative documentary project that Garry, Keane, and Andrew McConnell dreamt up back in 2012, and later spent over 4 years completing with the people of Gaza, bearing witness not only to the 2014 war that destroyed their sites of refuge, but also to their everyday acts of courage and creativity that keep alive a place that has been not only severed geographically and socioeconomically through the ongoing blockade since 2007, but also dislocated from the realm of justice and accountability. The British Palestinian writer Selma Dabbar says, "There is Gaza in all of us, the idea of continuing to fight for what one believes to be morally and legally compelling, even if all the odds are against you." Our event today is part of the attempt to keep the conversation about Gaza going and to open it up further, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Rita. I'm delighted. My name is Denis Condon. I work with Rita in the Department of English in Maynooth. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event. We're sorry that due to rescheduled work commitments, Garry Keane, the co-director and producer of Gaza, can't be with us this evening. On the other hand, it's my great pleasure to introduce Andrew McConnell, Gaza's co-director and director of photography. Andrew is an award-winning photographer who has been covering world events for the past 15 years or more. His work often focuses on themes of conflict and displacement and has appeared in many of the world's top publications, including National Geographic, Vanity Fair, Time, Der Spiegel, Stern, and Le Monde. Andrew has worked in depth on issues such as the Syrian refugee crisis, conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the forgotten Sahrawi people of Western Sahara, for which he was awarded first place at the World Press Photo Awards, second time he received this award. Among numerous other honors, Andrew has won 4 National Press Photographer Association awards, including the prestigious Best in Show, first place in the Pictures of the Year International, and 2 Sony World Photography Awards. Based in Beirut for many years, Andrew has worked throughout the Middle East. Gaza is his first work as a filmmaker and follows on from his photographic series Gaza Surf Club, which was a project in the besieged territory that began in 2010. Andrew is now going to show us some of the photos from that series and talk us through them. Thank you. Andrew.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. So I'm going to talk you through this project that is actually 10 years old now. I completed this in 2011, but I began it in 2010. And actually it was December 2010. And I'd read a small article somewhere in just a paragraph in a magazine, which I can't remember what one it was, but about this group of surfers in the Gaza Strip. And I had grown up surfing on the west coast of Ireland, from Enniskillen, and I'd spent summers in Donegal around Bundoran, Rosnala, surfing since I was about 13 years old. And it struck me immediately, not just because I was a surfer, but because this was something I'd never heard of, coming out of a place like Palestine and Gaza. It was completely unique. And I based my career up until that point, and very much continue to do so, on telling old stories in sort of new ways and sort of bringing focus to places which may not have, maybe in sort of a media shadow, or if they're not, like in such cases Gaza, they still suffer from sort of stereotypical reporting. So I went to Gaza, December 2010, crossed in through Egypt, which was still open at that point, and was quite straightforward in those days to cross that border at Rafah. And I met with this group, and there was about 26 young guys and a couple of girls. And this was Mahmoud, who you'll recognize from the film, and he was very much sort of the leader of the group. And he just had this charisma and style about him that it seemed to draw everyone towards him. And these boards had been donated from outside. There'd been a project, that had been set up to try and get boards into the territory. And they had about 16 surfboards between, maybe not even 16, maybe a dozen surfboards between, the 26 of them. So they would have to share boards all the time. And when I started to hang out with them, it was immediately obvious that this was a real novelty in Gaza. They would get stares wherever they went. Nobody really knew what to make of them, because it's very much a burgeoning sport. It's only a very small group of people who practice it. So that first month that I went in 2010, actually, there were no waves. So I found myself sort of after the month leaving Gaza, I had virtually no photos to show for it. So it was quite worrying. I didn't really know if I had a project at all, and if there was any point in returning. But the surfers assured me that if I was to go back in the summer the following year, that there would be waves. And so I decided to go. So I returned in late May 2011, and again, I was building up a collection of imagery on land and just spending time with these guys, and in many regards it was good, because I was earning their sort of trust and becoming a part of this small crew. A lot of the guys are lifeguards, and during the summer you'll see them on these lifeguard towers virtually every day. The work, there's such a lack of work there that this job doesn't pay a lot, but any sort of work is very much snapped up. And so this is sort of the back room of one of these towers, and just smoking shisha after a surf. So eventually, the waves did begin to arrive, fortunately. And for anyone who is a surfer out there, you'll know all about waxing a surfboard. But in Gaza, there are no surf materials. And so this is them using candle wax, melting the candle wax onto the boards. So the wax gives grip for their feet. But I mean, it's just a really it's a testament to the total lack of resources that the people in Gaza have, that you see it even in the act of surfing. So, I don't think any surfer looking at this would be familiar with having to do something like this, to resort to this. And eventually, we get out into the water. In the summer months, especially on a Friday, which this is, the beaches are really rammed with people. They really are the only sort of escape from the trials of daily life in Gaza. And so most days in the warmer months, there'd be substantial crowds on the beaches. And this picture was taken around mid-July. And I think this is, at this point, I've been working there for over 2 months, and it was still touch and go whether or not this was going to work as a project. But I think when I got this picture, it was the moment when I thought, yeah, there really is something in this. 'Cause to me, I think it's probably the picture of the whole series. It's so alive and so full of sort of the energy of Gaza and the very different sort of aspects and the almost chaotic nature of Gaza too. The fact that you have to avoid horses when you're trying to paddle out. It's just so epitomizes Gaza in many ways. These are actually Bedouin kids who, after a day's work, would always come down to the sea with the horses, just to let them cool off and to have some fun. And so when I started to go out into the sea with the guys, something started happening. I kept seeing them look towards the horizon in all the images I was taking. Of course, as a surfer paddles out, he's always breaking through the waves and looking towards the horizon, see what's coming next. But in this context, it started to take on a different meaning. And when you think of these surfers as some of the only people who really get to leave Gaza, if only briefly, every time they paddle out, I find this quite profound, that they were crashing through the waves and looking towards this unseen horizon, which represented, I thought, through these photos, in many ways, freedom that was unattainable. And so for quite a while, I actually just concentrated on surfers paddling out. And this metaphor for freedom. These are two of the only girls who surf in Gaza, and they're two cousins, and they're only about 12 years old here. They've since stopped surfing because that's what happens when the girls reach 15, 16. It's sort of no longer acceptable within what is a very conservative society for girls to continue to go out and surf. So you'll find very often, for example, their older sisters who used to surf the way they are now would sort of, as older teenagers, would look longingly at the sea, but for them it was sort of then off limits. Though they did admit that occasionally, very early in the morning, their father might allow them to sneak out and maybe catch a wave. So for a while, you know, I actually thought that the project would just be a series like this, of the surfers looking out to what was out there, and you see this sort of struggle in their faces and this great determination. Trying to break free. But in the end, I think certainly myself, and I just thought other people would really want to see, after all of that, I think you want to see a wave being caught and some actual surfing being done, because the act of surfing in itself is a great act of sort of expressing freedom. It's a creative act. I think it's in this context, it's also an act of defiance. And I think in many ways it symbolizes that defiance that you see in Gaza every day, in just simple acts of trying to continue a normal life and enjoy your life as much as possible under what are the most difficult of conditions. So this is the final picture, and you know, you see the rubble of the port, and there in the background are the chimneys of the big power station, which is right on the border inside Israel. And yes, so this was late August then, 2011. And so what turned into about 3.5 months. And the project was basically complete. And I released it then, and it was remarkable how the reaction, it was published widely throughout the world and spoken about on many forums, many places, especially within photography groups too. It was something new that hadn't been seen from Gaza, and from there it began what has led to a decade working in the strip.
Thank you so much for those wonderful evocative photographs, Andrew. Can I just ask you a very simple question? Why did you, or is it true that all the photographs that you've shown us are in black and white? Was that a conscious decision? Clearly a conscious decision, but did you take color photographs? And if so, why did you decide to make this series in black and white?
Yeah, well, they're taken on a digital camera. They're converted to black and white. And it was a very deliberate approach, because I didn't want this to be a sort of another series of imageries of surfing, because it was about much more than surfing. And I mean, if you see surfing imagery, it's all to do with sport, and the magazines are full of glossy, color photography, and I wanted it not to be a sports project, even though it's about the sport of surfing. There's so much else going on. And so the black and white just brought a different feel, and it brought also the aesthetic of the way water and the sea is recorded in black and white. I think is there's much more depth. There's much more of a very different feel, a more artistic feel, when it's recorded in black and white. And again, I just wanted to go beyond sport to really call up something deeper and something more profound than sport.
It seems to evoke that sense of classic photojournalism, for example?
Yes, certainly. And it is journalistic in nature. And the black and white feeds into that. But also, I think the black and white just gives it a bit more gravity. And whereas you could turn quite quickly from a color image of surfing, whether it's in Gaza or anywhere else, you see a picture of a person on a wave, blue sky, blue water. It immediately just evokes, I think, a very one-dimensional response. Mm. But with black and white, I think it's all of a sudden you're confronted with, I think, different layers of different elements going on, and so I think it causes you to pause and to take a second look.
I see we've got a question in the chat which asks, is the seaside the main recreation area in Gaza? Does it summarize Gaza?
Yeah, it's the only place really that people can go en masse to relax, to unwind. There is nowhere else really. I mean, there's a couple of small parks people can go, but I mean, the place is so crowded, the streets are so narrow and built up, and the traffic is relentless. So there's literally nowhere else for a Palestinian to go apart from a cafe or a restaurant. But outside, the sea is it, and it's just a very important aspect, a place to breathe for everyone living there.
Andrew, the sea is part of this affirmative politics of life, it seems, and in many ways that shows in the energetic surfers. But you've also photographed and filmed fishermen facing military ships in the sea, and also witnesses on the beach to ongoing violence, as in one instance near the end of the film, we can see that elderly mourner contemplating the sea in prayer after he had lost young family members, I remember, killed in the bombings on the beach during the war. So we see those striking glimpses of various Gazans looking at the distant horizon, and you've talked about the life-affirming politics, but also the sea being part of everyday life. What other aspects did you experience, particularly during the war? What did the sea become for Gazans?
Well, during the war, it became very much off limits. And so, which was striking, during the summer months, because the war took place July and August, and would normally be full from dawn till dusk. There wasn't one person on the beach. Nobody would be out and be exposed or allow themselves to be exposed, because you'd be very vulnerable. And as we saw with the children that were killed on the beach, for anyone to be sort of walking along the beach would have been highly suspicious. And the drones were a permanent presence overhead. So you really, you took your life in your hands if you allowed, if you even went for a walk. So you stayed away from it. But then strangely, the exception to that, and this is quite surreal, was there were ceasefires during the war, and they were really actually important for the film, because firstly, I actually went surfing in Gaza during ceasefires, and the waves don't come very often in Gaza. This is something you have to remember. It's very inconsistent. So these Mediterranean swells that will pop up for a few hours and then disappear. Very different to somewhere like the west coast of Ireland. So when they do arrive, you have to take advantage of them. And so I found myself in the middle of a ceasefire, which lasted maybe 24 hours to 48 hours, with the surfers called me up and saying, listen, there's great waves, let's go. And I'd be like, are you serious? Is it safe? And they assured me it was safe, and we went out. And you would have some people on the beach during these ceasefires, and you would have some fishermen, you know, just fishing from the shore with nets. A few people walking. I mean, much quieter than it would be ordinarily. But so we paddled out, like it was me and Mahmoud and Ibrahim. So 3 of us. And, you know, you could hear the drones overhead. And you know, I was a little nervous, I have to say. But you know, you have to take these opportunities when you're trying to. It's so difficult to actually film that. That was me trying to film instead of take photos. Actually, film surfing for the film. And so yeah, I just had to take the risk, and it would turn out, you know, nothing happened. It was fine. But it was quite unnerving. And then on another day of a ceasefire, I travelled down the coast just to see what was happening, and got to a village about 10 kilometers south of Gaza City. Durbala, it's called. It's actually a refugee camp. And there, about half a kilometer out to sea, was this one little figure on a raft. And he was obviously a small boy. And I just thought it was, you know, he was the furthest out to sea out of anyone. There was a few fishermen out on small boats, just lone fishermen, you know, doing a little bit, but only a few hundred meters out. And there was this kid. So I waited for him to come in. And I was with my fixer, and I said, let's just wait and see who this kid is. And that kid turned out to be Ahmed. And he had built this little raft out of polystyrene, and you see it sort of at the beginning of the film. And all his little brothers started to flock around, and you know, all these kids appeared from nowhere. It was like, oh. And they all had these little rafts, and I just followed him sort of for about the rest of the afternoon. End up following him back to his home, which you see in the film is that little sort of beachside rundown shack almost. It's only like 2 rooms, and I met the father, and I met the other 39 kids, and yeah, he was immediately just a fascinating sort of presence. He just had this face which was, you know, he never said much. I think that comes through in the film, but there was something about him, and whenever I started filming him, the camera just loved him. He just had this great presence on film, and I knew quite quickly that he'd be a character.
Could you say something then about the way that the film evolves out of the photographic series? Maybe something about how your relationship with Garry evolved and led to the making of the film.
Yeah, well, so it was 2012, and I received an email from Garry. Garry was sort of researching a documentary he was making on photographers, working worldwide, and he was researching a feature documentary on photographers, and I think mainly conflict photographers. And so we got to chatting, and quickly sort of materialized that he was from Ballyshannon and I was from Enniskillen, which, for no one who knows that corner of the world, it's about 20 miles apart, you know, these two towns in the northwest of Ireland. So Enniskillen is just inside Northern Ireland, and then Garry's just across the border in the Republic, in Donegal. So of course, immediately, you know, we had a good few yarns, and he was asking me about what I was working on next, and you know, I told him about this. I just completed this project in Gaza, and I was also at that point considering making a short about the surfers, because I began dabbling in video, and so Garry was really interested in that. And when I went home, I was in Beirut at that stage. When I went home for Christmas that year, and we met up in Rasnowla, actually overlooking in the Smuggler's Creek there, overlooking the beach, and we had a few pints, and yeah, we just talked a lot. And Garry was really interested in Gaza, always had been, and was fascinated by the Gaza Surf Club project. And it sort of evolved from there, you know. Conversations started about, well, you know, what could we do with this little short about surfers? He initially wanted to follow me maybe into the strip, and as part of that documentary, follow my work there. But that project of his sort of quickly fell away. I think he secured funding for it. But we continued to talk, and we broached the idea of, let's make a film together. And initially, we talked about, could we make it just about the surfers? But it became apparent quite quickly that, let's not confine ourselves just to the surfers. Let's use this idea of the sea and the people who live by the sea and work in the sea, their lives revolve around it. Let's concentrate on that as an interesting route into this fascinating place, which nobody really understands very well. And yeah, so out of those conversations, gradually, took a while now, but we began filming in 2014.
And one of those people who lives by the sea is Karma. Not a surfer, as far as I know.
No.
And someone very different, maybe from someone you would have met during that the surfing trips to Gaza. I imagine that what you present in the film is quite a range of individuals from across Gazan society. Ahmed, who you mentioned, clearly live by the beach and use the sea quite a lot, but Karma seems to be a young woman, a very articulate and talented young woman, who we might actually hear. I think we've got a clip of Karma, so maybe we'll watch that clip if that's okay.
Sure.
Give people an idea of the film itself. Remind them of the film itself. So I'm going to try and share this clip and see how we go.
فاضة بسنة في 99. كتير 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 صعب كان لإلنا كلنا، وبالذات لكرمة، لأنه كرمة شخص حساس جدا جدا جدا.
People from the outside countries, they can't see other than the fact that we live in constant wars. The only thing they give us is like sympathy, and it bothers me so much. They only see the side they want to see. They should look deeper. Whenever I dream, I close my eyes, I see myself on an island, and all you can see is the sea. Whenever I stand there and breathe the air of the sea, I can breathe freedom. The feeling you get, it's amazing. It can't be expressed by words, seriously. There are things that you can't express by words. That's why I have my cello, so it's like my own translator to what I feel. And I hope one day that I'll be able to play like a professional and to give it what it deserves. I hope one day I'll be able to achieve that, to be like creative and to be happy. So.
ولدت
Andrew, Karima's line, there are things that you can't express by words, of course, resonates in so many ways. But your photos and films show in many instances the imaginative resourcefulness of Gazans against all odds, really, and their creative acts that build some kind of defiant islands of hope. But to what extent do you think Gazans expressing themselves artistically when they can, and documentarian artists like yourself, and I'm sure I might not be using the correct term, but documentarian artists like yourself can provide powerful spaces for such kind of expression? And to what extent can that counter the unlivability of Gaza, really, and keep the story alive?
I think creative expression is vital for the people of Gaza, and especially important in a situation where, you know, all your other sort of outlets of expression and hope have been cut off. It's hard to overstate exactly how important that is for, you know, for the mental health of the Gazans, and for survival. It really is, you know, just the act of playing the cello or playing music or surfing or painting, whatever it may be, however it's expressed, is, you know, in a situation like Gaza, is a lifeline for these people. Because there's such a lack of hope, and it sort of permeates every section of society. But you find wherever it is expressed, wherever creativity is being expressed, then you know, I think they're just in a much healthier state than someone who isn't, who allows the sort of the situation, the pressure, the weight of it to bear down on them. In terms of sort of as a documentarian, our creative input or impact, you know, I think it's also, it's an incredibly important act to create, whether you're from Palestine or you're from outside and you go there and you create. The act of doing that sort of is, as you say, keeping the story alive, which at this point is about the only thing we can do, because it seems it's, for Palestine, it's been sort of a series of failures over the past years, decades. And it certainly seems at this moment in time that I think for Palestinians, the situation is as bad as it's ever been. On the international front, they're losing sort of at every turn. Certainly over the Trump administration, it's been sort of disaster after disaster. And so the act of creating this film is one of, I think, defiance against sort of injustice. It's hopefully it keeps the conversation going, and it keeps hope alive. At its best, I think art can do that. It can keep hope alive.
Absolutely.
And while in the film you clearly emphasize the fact that Gazans are trying to live normal as possible lives, you also show us the other aspects of life, and that is frustration and struggle. And I'd like to show maybe another clip that shows that aspect of the film, if that's okay.
في شرق شرق الشجاعية على نقطة نهل عوز، في مواجهات ما بين الشباب الفلسطينيين والإسرائيليين، في بيرجموا أحجار هناك. شباب بيضحي بده حريته وما زال في احتلال، يبقى لازم تستمر. هيك وجهة نظر الشباب، وما زال في شباب بتضحي. احنا كمان من واجبنا انه نقف ندعم المسيرة تبعتهم. ولا حاجة ولا حاجة، طلع يمين طلع يمين طلع شمال ولا شيء. هذا بس هذا بتقف في الهواء بيمشي الحال، يعني في شيء مشكلة. الجانب الطبي انت شايف، يعني احنا بأبسط الامكانيات او الامكانيات المتوفره بنقدر احنا نخدم المتواجدين عندنا، وكون انه في حصار على قطاع غزه بالذات الامكانيات الطبيه بتكون صعبه قدر الامكان، يعني باكبر قدر ما بتصوروا. لكن تخيل على الجانب الاخر على مفتوح على كل العالم.
That's such a wonderful way of showing that you know those moments of resistance and of violence, and the film powerfully represents various moments of resistance and violence. Will you say a little bit about the way in which you have scenes from the war here, and you've scenes of maybe everyday violence that we're looking at here? Talk a little bit about the way in which you have integrated those moments into the film.
Well, I should say, and I maybe should have said earlier, that, you know, our very early discussions, myself and Garry, were the one regard in which we agreed completely was that this should show you the other side of Gaza. This should show you the side that I came to quickly know and love, which is this energetic, humorous, colorful, really chaotic, yes, but so full of life. A place that that we never see, you know, none of us ever are exposed to. And so the issue of violence and showing that, you know, from very early on, we you know, I think when you set out to make a film, you never say never about anything. But we didn't want to show any violence, and it was never going to be a film about that. And you know, it could very easily have been a film where you never saw war or violence. But Gaza being what it is, you know, when you're working there over a long period of time, you are going to be exposed to this. And if you take 2014, for example, you know, I had planned to go in for July and August, and I've been planning it, myself and Garry have been planning it for the best part of a year. And I went in myself for those 2 months just to gather some footage to try and find characters. And of course, I get there and a war has broken out and that war lasted 50 days. And so, you know, when you're there, and this turned out to be the biggest war in Gaza's history, you know, you have to cover that. This is an important event in the history of this place, and it's vital that you record it. So you know, I day after day documented the war, and you know, at the end of that trip, you know, I must have had over 100 hours of footage just of war. And so it obviously, you know, some of that footage was incredibly powerful. And so that changed the conversations we were having. I mean, it obviously then, you cannot ignore that. But still, the main force of this film always still had to be the other side, the side that we don't see, the people, and the, you know, the positive nature of what can be a really inspiring, wonderful place. So we were then presented with the challenge of how to combine these two aspects. And we went back in 2015, and we started to find more characters. We broadened it again. You know, the sea then had seemed too restrictive. If we're going to tell this film and this story about this place, then why, you know, restrict ourselves just to the sea? Let's do the quintessential Gazan film. And so then we started to look for other people, other characters who could represent the place. And so that's how we found Karma and Ibrahim. You know, he was someone who we saw in the footage of 2014, who popped up in one incredibly powerful scene, which is actually at the end of the film, where you see him sitting in the back of an ambulance, and he has this 1,000-yard stare. And it was at the end of a really terrible day in Gaza. And that was outside the morgue, and he'd obviously, you know, God knows what he'd seen that day. And we saw his face, and we saw, you know, who is this guy? It just had this incredible face. And a paramedic, you know, who better to tell us of the issues stripped faces through violence. So we found him. You know, it's not hard to find someone in Gaza if you have a picture. Everybody knows everybody, really. So we found him in about 10 minutes. And yeah, he turned into, I think, you know, for many people, he's their favorite character. He's so powerful and so articulate, because, you know, this is a man who's lived through the darkest days of the Gaza Strip. And the points he makes are really sort of moving and telling.
Yes.
Yeah, so he was really became a sort of a real anchor of the film.
And he has that one moment where he says that, you know, at times he hates people from anywhere else, and it's a moment of truth. It's a moment where, absolutely, because you know that you've seen those images, very powerful images, and what he does every day, that you just can't but agree with them. You know, the people who live in safety and lives of comfort, and don't have to deal with this every day. You know, that somebody who has to go through that every day really does deserves a respect that we don't usually we don't usually see these people. We don't accord them the respect of attention even.
No, absolutely. And he's articulating, you know, what a lot of people feel, and that is the sense of abandonment that pervades Gaza completely. After so many failed attempts, you know, and to try and reach some sort of solution, nobody really has any hope in that anymore. That the outside powers, or certainly Europe or America, are any way vested in trying to find an agreeable deal between Israel and the Palestinians. So they know they're on their own, and Ibrahim just articulates that just, I think, better than anybody else really could, when in what is a very succinct sort of 2 lines.
Yes. I think, Rita, your
Against the sense of abandonment, they're going to something more optimistic and dynamic, that screening in Gaza. So a final question before the Q&A. It's almost a year now when for the first time your film was shown in Gaza itself at the Gaza Red Carpet Human Rights Film Festival after much campaigning. Can you tell us more about that particular event and what it meant for Gazans and for the team who made the film?
Well, that was it was the Red Carpet Human Rights Film Festival, which has been running since 2014. It was set up in the aftermath of the war. It was again some sort of creative expression of what the Palestinians can do with such little resources, and they had this wonderful festival, which I think many people saw the imagery, but it was a red carpet rolled through the rubble of what is the neighborhood of Gaza City after the war. It was quite an affecting image to see that, because this is Gaza, life goes on there, and they know better than anybody that they have to pick themselves up and get on with it. And it so happened that last year they hadn't been able to secure funding, and so we were able to step in, and Garry actually set up the crowdfunding page to allow the festival to run in 2019. And we had a great response, raised, I think, over £18,000, and incredible response. People really, very quickly from all over the world donated. So it was really encouraging, and yeah, the festival was set up, it happened, and we, well, I was able to go. Garry, again, is a busy man, unfortunately. He had other work commitments. I do envy him his workload sometimes, but sometimes I don't. And that was one of the occasions where, I fortunately had a window where I was free and could go in. Brendan was supposed to come with us, but again, he also couldn't make it. So I went in by myself, and we had great support from the Irish embassy in Ramallah. They were able to help us and come along, also represent Ireland on the night. And really, just a fantastic evening where the old Amar cinema in Gaza was blocked off outside, and we had the whole street cordoned off and set up a large screen, a huge cinema screen, and we projected it, and we had the street packed. It must have been, it was over 500-600 people. All the characters came along, and it was their first opportunity, to see it. And so for us, after what had been an incredible year last year, we started in Sundance, which is every documentary maker's dream, is to premiere at Sundance, and we were fortunate enough to get that opportunity. And then we toured, we were all over the world, and that was, in many ways, the most important screening of all, because I certainly have spent now 10 years working on the strip, and got to know these people very well. And and Garry also, we worked many long months there, and I'm sure the characters, very often they don't know what is going to be produced at the end of this. They sort of have to place a certain amount of trust in us, that we're going to do right by them. So it was important for them to see it and to get their reaction. And the reaction was, overwhelmingly positive. Everybody loved it. They said, so many people came to us afterwards and said, you represented us so well, you captured us. And that was the best sort of compliment we could have received. So yeah, it's just a beautiful memory, really, when I look back on it. Just that whole, I stayed for a couple of days, and got to see everyone again. I think any trip to Gaza is a privilege. because it's such a difficult place to get to, and you're never really sure if you're going to get in. You know, we're fortunate we got to go back a few times and finally finish this film, but there were points where we didn't know if this would ever really see the light of day. It's that kind of place. So that memory is just one that will stay with me forever. It's just one of those things you look back on. It was just, you think, yeah, that was perfect.
What a beautiful trajectory from Sundance to Gaza to make it complete, really, for the film.
Yeah, it was the perfect way to wind up that year. Really, really just sort of the icing on the cake.
As you can probably see, Andrew, we're joined by colleagues and members of the department here. I wonder, do any of our colleagues have a question for Andrew or a comment on the film? You can unmute yourselves and ask the question.
Hello.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi.
Hi, it's Sophie speaking here. I wanted to, I was actually quite touched by the film. I think especially seeing such high levels of humanity in all of the chaos and just eking out beauty and just coping with the, if you think how we get into such a crisis, if our shopping's arrived and something's missing, and they're literally living in all of this chaos and just carrying on regardless. And I just feel quite helpless, even though there was a kind of peace knowing that there's such humanity there in this togetherness. But what can we do as students, as people that are in college in the hope of changing how things are? What could we do you think, to further bring light to this impossible situation?
Yeah, it's a question we're asked everywhere we go. Probably after every screening we had this question, and it's also probably the most difficult question, because how do you answer that when nothing has worked over all these years, all these decades, whether nothing has changed and things have only got worse? It's something that I've struggled to answer. And I asked a Palestinian friend recently this question, and a writer, and he said to me, when everything else has failed, there's only one thing you can do, and that's to keep the story alive. And I think that's it. And whether you're a student or an activist or anyone, if it's a simple act of the project that you decide to work on in college is related to the issue, one way or another, just to tell the story now is the only thing I think we can do, because otherwise, if the story dies, then there's nothing left, because everything else has failed. Diplomatically, nothing has worked. In terms of PR, the demonization of Palestinians is really profound, certainly in America, and I've experienced that when I went there firsthand. So at so many turns, Palestinians have been blocked and denied sort of justice in many ways. So I think that's the most important thing now, is to keep the story alive.
Thank you for
Thanks,
that.
Sophie. Lauren Brown, I noticed your comment in the chat.
Hi. First of all, thank you. I really enjoyed the just your words on it. I thought they were very beautiful. I enjoyed the film overall. But I'm on the MA program, and we look at oppressed voices as kind of a whole, I find, and I was very I found the children in the film very striking, and the children, a child's voice is often the most oppressed in any situation, And I'm just wondering, was there much of an awareness in the children and the teenagers, particularly those who were surfing and those who were on the beach? Like, were they concerned with the political environment and the violent nature of their situation, or did it just not seem to be something in their mind?
Well, I think, you know, someone who grew up in the north of Ireland, I could, I certainly felt I could sympathize or understood their situation, because you don't, when you grow up in that situation, you don't, it's normal for you, and you don't know any different. And so, I mean, the simple answer is no. They're not really aware of that this is a, you know, to live in such a violent environment is strange, because that's all they know. And I think that feeds into why they get on with life and live in ways that sometimes are surprising to us, because you think, wow, the oppression of living under that must be so huge that how can you sort of get on with daily life? But this is the thing, day-to-day life, you know, there aren't bombs dropping every day. It's isolated for the most part. I mean, there are regular incidents, but day-to-day life goes on, and this is what you find everywhere, where there's sort of places that are in conflict situations. So no, they're in some ways blissfully unaware that this is abnormal.
Thank you. I do think there's something quite beautiful about that, isn't there? About children's ignorance. Sometimes it can give you kind of a bit of hope, I think.
I think it's wonderful. It's the resilience of children anyway is fantastic, but just, I think maybe it's, as people get older, you know, they realize the abnormal aspect of their environment, and then that's obviously when these kids start to mature. Obviously they realize the environment that they're trapped in and the lack of opportunities that they're going to face in their lives, and that's when you see mental health issues and kids with any sort of means trying to escape, and that's what's happened a lot over the past few years. As Egypt has opened the border gradually, you see more and more. Any kid with means, any family with means will try and get their kids out when they're whatever, 18, early 20s. They'll try to get them out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Could I ask a question?
Of course. Deborah.
Yeah. I was just wondering, it's a very affecting documentary, and it's amazing that, you know, it's these people's, each of their voices that create that, you know, I think you mentioned it was a tapestry of experience that you wanted to convey, rather than one person's story or two persons' story. And you achieved that so well in this documentary. And I, you know, speaking about the children, like Karma and Ahmed, they kind of juxtaposed each other in terms of Ahmed's belief that, you know, he lived by the sea, he was born by the sea, he lived by the sea, and he would die there. And Karma looking out, thinking, you know, I want to, you know, she was hoping for a scholarship or a way of getting out, studying and coming back. You know, there's stories of people leaving and coming back, and it's just, you know, it's just, you would think that maybe if they left they wouldn't come back, but it's that thing, it's that pull of homeland and of belonging somewhere that is innately present in human beings, you know, that the political divisiveness that is occurring there, you know, is, you know, it can be depressing to think, how do you get beyond that, you know, and yet you can affirm in the voices of those children, you know, some kind of a future, you know. I'm sure your own background probably, you know, as you said yourself, growing up, you know, during the Troubles, as they call it, in Northern Ireland, you know, it is kind of, it's life affirming itself above the politics of a situation, isn't it? And it's giving that hope to people, you know, that, you know, it just seems such an impossible situation there, really, doesn't it? And the Red Crescent worker really kind of summed it up when he said about, you know, that he the thoughts of other people breathing, you know, on this planet, and these people are here, they're breathing, you know, their life is pumping through their bodies, and yet they live in this constant repressed situation, you know.
Yeah, and I think, you know, karma really articulates everything about the Palestinian struggle so well, and many of the words you're hearing, especially in the clip that was just shown tonight, you know, she was 14 years old when we interviewed her there. Yeah. She is and could be a formidable person, you know, given half a chance. So much easy intelligence and potential, and that could go sort of, well, it could get lost quite easily in Gaza without the right direction. I mean, I think Karma, hopefully, I know she wants to leave, and she's been making moves towards that goal.
Right.
She's studying a master's at the. She's studying her bachelor's at the moment, but I know she wants to study her master's outside, and so you would hope that Karma would go on and achieve something. But then, you know, if you're born in Gaza, the odds are very much stacked against you. And the basic things we take for granted, going to a cinema, you know, getting on a plane, you know, none of these kids have ever done any of that. So I mean, Karma does, you know, in contrast to little Ahmed, she represents, you know, sort of maybe the upper classes of Gaza.
Yeah, the frustrated potential, you know, as opposed, you would wonder, you know, which it's such a, you know, it's the juxtaposition of it, I thought, was just so, it kind of created that cycle of, you know, the frustrated potential, and then the child who has that feeling, that sense of belonging. He will be the captain of his fishing ship, you know, his own fishing boat, and he wants to know all about the fishing, yet they can only fish within 3 miles. Is the
3 miles, sometimes 6 miles,
you know, in a small overfished area, and yet he has that dream, you know. He doesn't see that as a limitation to his own dreams. And it's such a fantastic, it needs to be shown over and over again, this documentary, really and truly. It's congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, that was very long-winded. Apologies.
Thanks, Deborah. Any other questions and comments?
I have one, Denis.
Go ahead, Rita.
Great, thanks. Sorry, the chat is in my way. Andrew, your work is wonderful. I was really struck looking at the photographs. I was recalling Judith Butler's question, when is life grievable, you know, and she, in her book, she argued that if we think a life is unlived, then it's not grievable. And the surfing photos really demonstrate, you know, life being lived to the fullest. But it also recalled for me, I worked a little bit, I interviewed a photographer, a South African photographer who, she's an LGBT activist, and she took photos of lesbian and trans women in the townships, started in Cape Town and then expanded really all over the continent of Africa, but I asked her, like, how did she get out of a position where she was kind of the idea of the Western gaze and turning them into objects and exotics in some ways. And she said, well, the way it started for her was that she was taking photos of her girlfriends and her girlfriends' girlfriends, her ex-girlfriends' girlfriends, and it was, she saw herself, she was in this insider-outsider relationship with the community, or really she was an insider. But for you, I see a kind of a, you're an outsider, but then there's a kind of, you talked about how there's a kind of cartography of struggle there, because the understanding, the kind of solidarity from having grown up in Northern Ireland. But I'm wondering how you involved the photographers in the generation of those photos. Like, did you speak to them about the photos, and what was it like just to begin that relationship where you're in the water taking photos of them, sometimes apparently very close to them, and as an outsider? And did you get their permission? How did they participate?
The surfers, yeah. Well, as I mentioned, that first month when I went there, there were no waves, and so I still spent a lot of time just hanging out with them. It meant we didn't sort of just straight into the water, and then there wouldn't be these sort of conversations where you just get to know each other. I had made contact in the first place through actually an American surfer who was one of the people who'd been instrumental in donating surfboards into Gaza. None of them could speak English at that point, so all my correspondence had been through this American. But once I went into Gaza, then that was sort of me very much on my own. And it turned out that Mohammed, one of the surfer you saw in the first image, the older man with you saw leaving this apartment with his little daughter in tow, he could speak English, and he became very much a route into the other groups, because there's little sort of groups of guys dotted around that just very small strip of coastline. And it just became a routine for me to just pop down to the beach every day and hang out at one of these lifeguard towers. And Gaza is, in that regard, actually one of the most wonderful places to work, because everybody is really happy to see a foreigner come in and a journalist come in, and everybody really wants to tell their story, and is really grateful that someone is paying attention. So there isn't this sort of case of what you find in very many other countries where you have to break through a certain barrier to gain people's trust, or spend a lot of time sort of corresponding before you even get to meet them. There it was like you can become friends very, very quickly, or friendly at least, in Gaza. And people often ask what were the main challenges working there, and I always reply, it was trying to get any work done with all the amounts of tea that we were being offered everywhere we went. So, and that's, I'm half joking, but that's actually also quite true, because everywhere you go, you're invited into people's homes, and you have to sit and have a cup of tea, have a chat. And it was the same with the surfers. They were really liked the idea of what I was doing. And they were totally up for it, and they loved to see the photos. And after every session, it was like, when can we get the photos? Send us the photos. And as a photographer, you rarely actually do that, to send the pictures to people immediately. But I would have to. They were so keen to get them up, a few up on Facebook. They were setting up a website at that time, and they just loved seeing themselves. I think all surfers actually do. It's actually quite nice to get a picture of yourself surfing, because there's very seldom is there a photographer in the water. So that wasn't difficult, really wasn't. And And then about how they're represented, well, that's a case of, yeah, there has to be an element of trust there. I mean, I always told them I wanted to show what they do to the outside world, and to show that there is, you know, it's wonderful that there's this expression of freedom inside Gaza. And, you know, being a surfer myself, really the route was quite clear for me to integrate myself into the group, and they became friends, which is ultimately what you want. If you're a documentarian and you're trying to tell a story of a person or of people, then at the end of the day, you probably end up becoming friends. It's the best way to tell their story.
Thanks, that's a wonderful answer, thanks.
Thanks, Rita. We've just got a few minutes left. Would anybody have a last question?
Andrew, could I ask a question? Hi, from fellow Andrew. Thanks very much. I've really enjoyed the talk and your work. Just noticing in your photography, a huge amount of very heavily skewed and sloped horizons and angles, and that's obviously quite characteristic of your work. I wondered if you just say a little bit about that.
It's, I think maybe simply on an aesthetic level, I think it often makes an image more dynamic. If you have a series of perfectly horizontal horizons, time after time after time, it becomes very repetitive, and the pictures lose a certain impact. So it's not even something conscious. It's although sometimes it is, but it's more, certainly with the surfers, it feeds into the chaos of being in the sea, of being smashed about by waves. You want to add that dynamic aspect, absolutely, to the imagery. It just makes for much more impactful imagery.
Great, thank you.
We maybe have room for one more quick one.
I have another if nobody else is.
Go ahead, Rita.
I'm just thinking about the sort of kinds of Western, apparently humanitarian discourses. I'm thinking, for instance, of the Coney film back in 2012. Are there ways where you ever feel yourself being swept up into that kind of a humanitarian discourse that is more about creating a sense of fellow feeling among audiences in the West, and a sense of, you know, the West being the custodian of humanitarian values, and something, you know, is a projection of kind of violence onto the other? Are there ways in which you've ever felt swept up in that, or the ways you've had to try to counter that? Or do you just, is the situation so very serious in Gaza that it doesn't become part of your work or invade your work in any way?
Well, when the photographic project was first released, you know, people said, you know, I remember comments like, you know, are you really humanizing the Gazans here? And I reject that, because I'm not there to humanize them. These people don't need to be humanized. Everybody should know that they're humans. But what I am doing is something else, which I think is very important, and then it's the same for the film. And you know, in the West has so much say in what happens in the Middle East, and dictates largely the direction that somewhere like Palestine is taking, and was the reason for the creation of this whole issue in the first place. And today it's no different. And so if we in the West, you know, are responsible ultimately for the direction that this whole region could take, then it's vital that the populations understand what Gaza is, and what the Palestinians living in Gaza are about, and what that world entails. Because if we are the custodians of their future, and perhaps we aren't, but certainly Europe or America could tonight make policy changes that would change the lives of everybody in this film. So it's important that people are comfortable with what Gaza is, because for years we've all been listening to reports of war, and for, I think, the majority, those sort of reports go in one ear and out the other, and it's like, okay, another conflict in Gaza. But I think to be comfortable with this idea of what Gaza is, and that it's not some sort of haven for terrorists, it's not some sort of extremist ghetto, but there are people there trying to live their lives and under really an unjust situation brought about partly by, you know, the governments of the West, then it's a responsibility of everybody to understand it better. And so I hope that's at the heart of what these projects are about.
Thank you, Andrew. I have many questions on my mind, but that's for another day. Hopefully when we can show the vast range of your photographic work on displacement and conflict at Maynooth and the future, when we can all be present there. Just to end with a few words, literary words. At the end of his Gaza diary that chronicles the 2014 war, titled "The Drone Eats With Me," the Gazan writer Atif Abu Saif says, "For those who are left homeless or bereaved or with their livelihoods destroyed, the war goes on. The only difference is the world isn't watching anymore." Our thanks to you, Andrew, and to Garry, who couldn't be with us tonight, for helping us continue to actively engage with Gaza and to rediscover those links among the often disconnected space-times of witnessing, representation, and justice. Thank you all for attending and for your valuable contributions. Have a good evening.
Thank you.